You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY and Political Voices Network. Outside the Box is brought to you by Roush Plumbing and Remodeling, the plumbing and remodeling company the Fox Valley depends on. Just to put a bow on the conversation we were having during the local half hour, there's a kid, and I use the term kid usually. He's 18 years old, legal adult, but he's going to be a high school grad here. He won a seat in the city council, the Marionette city council, and we were talking a little bit about exposure therapy and essentially getting used to the fact that yeah, you're younger and it can be a bit overwhelming when you see people sometimes twice, maybe even more than that. I'm more than twice the guy's age, for crying out loud. Um, Angry with you and coming up to you about issues that you might be in a little over your head. We all started somewhere, and as Anna says in my text line, if something scares you, it just means you haven't done it enough. And I mean, I think we all have that experience. Hell, I'm very new to social media, and shout out to the people who are joining me on Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok here. It was a bit of a mental hurdle for me to jump over just because, as someone who kind of abstained from social media for such a large percentage of his life, it can kind of feel overwhelming. And until you do it every day, it doesn't feel normal to you. And now that I kind of have been doing this for the last 2 weeks consistently, even longer than that on YouTube, it feels much more natural now. And this is going to happen for this kid as well. And I'm looking forward to see what he does. We need fresh eyes on this thing. We can't sit here complaining about the status quo and expecting things to get better while not changing the things that happen. And shout out to the regulars on the TikTok Live for joining. Always a pleasure. YouTube as well. And for all of you listening, 920-281-1150. These are my favorite kind of shows because we're going to have to start off shooting from the hip a little bit here. There was a plan starting for the show, but then, of course, I heard the news about the Strait of Hormuz. No intention to rhyme there, and I figured that would be as good of a place as any to start the conversation off. If you did not hear the CBS Newsmax report there, I'm happy to announce that at least for 10 days, the Strait of Hormuz has been opened back up. It looks as though the Trump administration has put out the fires that it started. So kudos to all parties involved for doing that, at least as long as this alleged ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel maintains. Although Cynthia did hit me up in the text line when she heard the reporting to say that the ceasefire has already been violated multiple times in the first couple of minutes that we knew that it existed. So very clearly a tenuous thing right now. But we'll have to see how things end up shaking out here. But it is a net positive. We have about 4 more days left until the ceasefire between America and Iran is set to run out. I speculated yesterday that I think there's going to be an extension on that ceasefire, and I still do believe that's the case. I think the violence, I hate to look at it this way, but is unpopular enough politically that I doubt we're going to see it pop back up again. We're either going to actually move forward with something here, probably reminiscent of the JCPOA, or we will see this an extension of the ceasefire. One of those two things will happen. But I want to highlight this, and this was going to be a segment that I was going to do even without this news, albeit from a different perspective here. Some of you may remember during the election season that Donald Trump received $100 million from the oil and gas industry. And there was a very famous meeting where he said, give me $100 million and I will, or excuse me, it was $100 million. And if you do, I will return that to you tenfold. And we covered it on this story, and we were talking about billionaire influence in politics. And man, oh man, would I like to see, at least on a state level, us try and do something about money in politics. The oil and gas industry is not unique to this, but it was specific for the purposes of this conversation. He said, give me $100 million and I will tenfold your money coming back the other way. The numbers are out right now, thanks to some investigative reporting by More Perfect Union. And I would like to jump into some stuff with you here because it highlights to me, I don't want it to sound like I am implying that this war was started exclusively in the name of oil and gas profits. There's a handful of other reasons, none of which I would argue are much less nefarious than that idea. But I would like to highlight that is not that We are seeing, as per More Perfect Unions reporting, the 100 biggest oil and gas companies on earth have been making an extra $30 million in profit every hour, thanks to the war in Iran. Someone's asking if this is live. Yes, this is live. Every hour, thanks to the war on Iran, according to The Guardian. If this trend holds for the remainder of the year, which, depending on what happens in the next 5 days, may not be the case, although you know as well as I do that the price of gas is not going to come down for a while, because we know prices go up quickly. They most certainly do not come down quickly. If this were to hold, it would be an extra $100 billion worth of extra profit, not revenue, just in 2026. We were having a conversation earlier in the week about the importance of trying to find a way to switch to renewable energy, not to stop drilling, not to stop using oil and gas, but starting the transition, because as long as oil and gas is a globally traded commodity and can be impacted by the moments that we have been seeing over the course of the last 6 weeks, we are going to be beholden to these kind of spikes, to these kind of extra costs, whether it be filling up our tanks, going to the grocery store, or whatever the situation may be. These numbers are damning to the oil and gas industry. And longtime listeners of the show remember that when Biden was in office, he tried to pass a bill that prevented gouging from the oil and gas industry that was blocked by every single Republican in the House and Senate. And then there was no effort to do anything beyond that. You may remember me talking about that bill, saying that I was frustrated that the price gouging conversation ended in the oil and gas industry, not that he was trying to do it in general. We are now seeing, this is already a foregone conclusion. In the last 6 weeks, an extra $30 million in profit every hour since this conflict started. I am hopeful that something good is going to come from this. As Jacqueline says in the text line, not a moment too soon for now. I think we are all happy that things are trending in the right direction and hopeful that we could get back to where we were 6 weeks ago, that we were only brought about because our allies in the Middle East decided to drag us into this conflict, and Trump, because he's not the best at being a president, decided to go along for the ride. But let's not ignore the corporate greed element to this war either. Obviously, prices were going to go up, but $30 million an hour and barely a peep from national sources, I think, should probably not go unnoticed. So we're going to keep following along with this. I just wanted to start the show here because I want to get my thoughts in. I had no intentions of talking about Iran and the ceasefire and anything going on over there. I had no issues in doing that. No intentions of doing that, I should say. But after I heard the news, I at least had to get my thoughts out there for the start of the program. Ken saying the ceasefire is only for the influencing the stock market, insider trading at its best. It could be, and the stock market has absolutely shot up through the roof as a result of this announcement. There's no way of avoiding that. A friend of mine who invests in the stock market actually sent it to me because he's been trying to get me to invest, and I was like, I'm gonna wait until all the volatility kind of goes away and we get back to business as usual. But that's a fair assessment, though, Ken, nevertheless, that I think is worth addressing here and could ultimately be the case. I'm not saying that this ceasefire is guaranteed to hold. I'm not saying what Israel and Lebanon are agreeing to is going to hold. Donald Trump has announced, we heard it in the CBS Newsmax report, that he is still not going to allow Iranian ships to pass through as a result of keeping the pressure up. We have no idea what's ultimately going to end up happening here. But I want to take a win where I can find one. The strait is open. Whether or not that's going to bring prices down is another conversation entirely. And we are watching these people gouge us with a regular basis. So to that effect, I'm going to put a pin in that conversation until Monday. We can see what ends up happening. Tuesday's the deadline for the ceasefire. We absolutely are going to have talks about this in the following week, but I at least wanted to start there, and we can tie this concept of corporate greed into the next point of the conversation. 2 days ago, we were highlighting a bill that went through in New York as a result of Zohran Mamdani's pressure to tax people that own second homes that they don't live in worth more than $5 million an additional 1%. If you haven't heard my promo, that has sent the wealthiest Americans into a tailspin, with one person saying they've never seen an idea scarier in politics. If a luxury tax is the scariest thing you can imagine in politics, I'm actually kind of jealous because it seems like you live a pretty stress-free life. Which is nice. We're going to talk about that bill and what I think can be learned by politicians nationwide by doing this kind of stuff. And I welcome your thoughts as well. As Jeremiah says on YouTube, it's 200 days until the midterms. I'm going to scroll through my TikTok live here a little bit. It seems like I kicked ruffled some feathers here. I'm going to see what's going on there. It's popping through pretty quickly, and we'll jump into that as well. But if you guys haven't heard what's going on or haven't seen the video I posted on my socials, we're going to have a little bit of fun with this one. So stay tuned. You're listening to Outside the Box here on WHBY. You know what's a funny realization? Doing AM talk radio, kind of slowly introducing myself to the online world, is like, for you guys that have been around, some of you get very frustrated when I do the two sides of the same coin conversation all the time, when I highlight the shortcomings of the Democratic Party alongside the obvious shortcomings of the Republican Party. And then if you were you're part of the online crowd, all of a sudden you realize I'm not doing that enough. So some of you think that I'm too hard on the Dems. That's the beautiful part of actually holding both parties to account, is inevitably you drill down to the point where like 7 people agree with you and everybody else is very frustrated with you for one reason or another, because you're not too far in one direction or the other. Not to say I'm centrist, but to say that you don't go hard enough on one party or the other, which is absolutely a fascinating reality for me. But nevertheless, I do want to shift gears here. And by the way, shout out to Hal, who says lots of luck waiting for less volatility in the stock market. It's always volatile. I guess what I'm saying is that there's always been a general upward trajectory of the stock market, at least in a post-recession era. And in the last 7 months or so, realistically, all of Donald Trump's second term, there have been a lot of 1,000-point swings. And there's a thing, for those of you that don't know me in my personal life, I say there's good luck and there's bad luck and there's Ben luck. Now, I've sort of turned that around in my mid-30s a little bit. But for most of my life, it always feels like 7 people could break a rule and nobody would get caught. And the second I began breaking that same rule, like a police officer or someone would be right there to watch it happen. And you got to learn. You got to learn. That's the way that my luck falls. I need to understand that that's the way that it works. And so I changed my approach and I made it work from there. If there were no luck, there'd be Ben luck. And so I have a retirement plan and all that, but the idea of actually like buying specific stocks or even just like, investing in the SPY or whatever, I feel like the second I did it, that would be when the next Great Recession happened. And I'm nervous about it because I've been making a lot of good decisions for several years in a row now, and I don't want to mess it up. And so that's what I'm talking about, Hal. And it just feels like with the 1,000-point swings, depending on which way the orange guy decides he wants to do something about tariffs or wartime activities, it's a little bit much for me right now, is all I'm saying. I'm not nervous about my 401k and whatnot, because again, I'm so far away from retirement that anything he does, I feel like there will inevitably be a bounce back. But with this kind of stuff, I just get nervous. Do I pivot for this? This is a really quick aside here. When I was 15 years old, I got $100 for my birthday. And my mom says, I think you should invest it in the stock market. And I was like, all right. So we look stuff up and we find this company called Global Crossings. They were invested in a number of different things, but specifically they were dealing with fiber optic lighting when that was first taking off. And I took my $100. I didn't buy video games with it. I could have, but I didn't. I put it in the stock market. And the first day I did it, within 24 hours, the stock went up to the point where my $100 bill became $120. And I took my parents out to breakfast that morning, telling them that I could wipe my butt with $20 bills. Don't worry about it. And that was back when $20 easily covered breakfast for 3 people and a tip. And then the next day, the company collapsed and I lost all my money. And so that's kind of why I'm hesitant to invest in the stock market in any kind of meaningful way as an adult now, is because 15-year-old Ben still remembers losing. Because you got to keep in mind, losing $100 at 15 years old, I may as well have lost $1 million. You know what I mean? Global Crossing, it turned out, was involved with like that Amway stuff. You remember all that? Enron in 2003. You guys remember 2002, 2003? You remember that? Global Crossing was one of those companies, it turns out. I lost everything. And so I've always been skeptical of the stock market since that moment. We are a creature of the experiences that we have. If you had an awesome experience gambling for your first time, you probably love gambling. If you lost your shirt, you probably think it's a stupid hobby. If you got so drunk the first time you drank that you puked, there's a chance you grew up not thinking that drinking was fun. It's just, I had a terrible first experience in the stock market, and it impacts my hesitancy. I'm not saying you guys shouldn't. I'm saying that's what impacts my hesitancy. I'd rather just, do like properties or whatnot rather than the stock market these days. But that's just me. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that's my experience. Val says, yes, Ben, both parties are failing us. Thanks for shedding the light on shortcomings, even though you get some backlash. It rolls off my back at this point. There's just so many new listeners at this stage of the game that some of them, like Jarmani, the YouTube chat is great. TikTok chat, there's some good eggs, and then there's some people that hear me just say 2 sentences and think like that's what my belief is in general, and it's kind of hard to take a 2-hour program and distill it into something I said live in the moment, in the moment. But I digress. Let's get back into the news of the day here. As I was highlighting in the lead up to this, and by the way, I see a bunch of you guys texting me about this. We are absolutely getting in the midnight effort to kind of renew FISA. I promise you, we're getting into that. But the whole Strait of Hormuz conversation kind of threw off the order of things here. We were going to start there, and I promise you, we will be getting to that, as well as a handful of other votes that took place yesterday. But I'm just trying to keep a steady through line for the program here today. So we just wrapped up a conversation about corporate greed in the oil and gas industry. How there was a bill, although some people in TikTok Live were upset with that bill coming from Joe Biden to try and rein in corporate greed in the oil and gas industry that ended up getting torpedoed by Republicans and a handful of Democrats. We are now seeing them make $30 million an hour extra in profit as a result of the unilateral war of choice and aggression that Donald Trump has started in Iran. No extra taxes coming their way. No talks about reining them in. Did you hear about a rainbow flag at the Congressional building? What's going on in New York is absolutely hilarious. And if you weren't listening, there is a new tax on the $5 million second homes that you don't live in. An ad went live that I'm going to play for you. And there's an extra reason why I want to play it for you, because as everybody knows, I've popularized this thing in talk radio when I'm trying to make a point, and I heightened it a little bit because he pulled it in this commercial. But I'm going to play what the rule is there. Now, this specific bill would not work in Wisconsin because there's not a lot of second homes that are worth these kind of costs. But I want to just show you, because he's going to describe in his own words what was enacted. And then what I want to do is show you what's going on in legacy media and show you what's going on in new media and show you how they're trying to convince you that trying to crack down on the wealthy, even in this minuscule way. A 1% tax on second homes you don't live in over $5 million. If there were anything more liberal than that, I cannot imagine. There's like 6 qualifiers before I get to who's actually getting taxed here, okay? It's like it knocks a larger and larger percentage of the population off with every number. And for some reason, people making $70,000 a year driving a Honda Civic are really mad at the idea that $5 million homes are going to get taxed an extra 1%. Let's give a listen to what was proposed, and then we're going to break down the reaction to it. Here's the commercial for it.
When I ran for mayor, I said I was going to tax the rich. Well, today, we're taxing the rich. I'm thrilled to announce we've secured a pied-à-terre tax, the first in New York's history. This is an annual fee on luxury properties worth more than $5 million, whose owners do not live full-time in the city. Like for this penthouse, which hedge fund CEO Ken Griffin bought for $238 million. This pied-à-terre tax is specifically designed for the richest of the rich, those who store their wealth in New York City real estate, but who don't actually live here. But even so, they're able to reap the huge financial rewards of owning property in, dare I say, the greatest city in the world. And most of the time, these units are sitting empty, since again, they don't actually live here. This is a fundamentally unfair system that hurts working New Yorkers. Now, it's coming to an end. This tax will raise at least $500 million directly for the city. It'll help fund things like free childcare, cleaner streets, and safer neighborhoods. As mayor, I believe everyone has a role to play in contributing to our city, and some a little bit more than others. Happy Tax Day, New York.
Okay, so very clearly drilling down on a specific demographic of people. And as somebody who talks about the housing crisis in this nation quite often, when you allow housing to stay vacant, despite the fact that you own it, that's one less house for other people to buy. There's a domino effect to that, right? So now the people that could afford that kind of home are now staying in a slightly cheaper home that somebody else that absolutely could not afford that a home would want to stay in. And it keeps dominoing until you get to the point where you're talking about renters or the cheapest homes now being out of reach for a larger percentage of people. It's a microcosm of what's wrong with the housing market in general. Now, we'll start with new media, because this was supposed to push back against what legacy media was doing. I'm just going to read a handful of them, and I want to remind you guys that the algorithm is designed to push you what you want to see. Needless to say, I interact with quite a bit of tax the rich, corporate greed kind of accounts and independent journalists in my free time when I am prepping this show. The algorithm should be pushing me people that are ecstatic about what's happening. And I am now going to read the first 6 that I came across after the announcement of this proposal. These are attached to the commercial that I just played for you. When the rich start selling off their properties at a loss and the values go down, New York City will lose more tax revenue than it thinks it's going to gain by doing this. If he can tax second homes of millionaires that are worth $5 million or more, that means it's only a matter of time before he goes for second homes of the average, hardworking, everyday Americans that are barely making it. He's diabolical. An elected politician standing outside a law-abiding person's home, demonizing them because they're successful, so creepy and weird. Non-residents, this is Bill Ackman, the guy who couldn't shut up about this race the entire time because he was very upset about what he had to say about Israel. Non-residents who spend millions of dollars on New York City apartments help drive New York City's economy. Most of the profit in condominium development is in the penthouses. The Ken Griffins of the world make NYC high-end development viable. I make $45,000 a year. My truck payment is $800 a month, and I am boiling mad about this. That one's clearly sarcastic, but I wanted to throw it in there because I thought it was hilarious. It's disturbing watching a politician specifically name a private citizen that is targeted by a policy. Ben Shapiro said that's smarmy Marxist, which pictured that nasally voiced jerk calling anybody smarmy. This smarmy Marxist doesn't see taxes primarily as a way to provide necessary public services. He sees them as revenge. I'd like to be clear, they're taking this money and specifically applying it to a universal child care program, since the cost of child care is driving so many eligible Americans that could be working in certain places out of their homes or out of their jobs as a result of the cost of child care. So it's not a matter of revenge. It's a matter of social programs here. This is what's thrust in front of me every single day. Now, I have the capacity to see this and use my basic deductive reasoning to be like, okay, the Nazi saluting jerk that runs this site is obviously upset anytime billionaires get taxed a little bit more, so he's going to make sure he has his thumb on the scale to make it seem like everybody hates this idea, no matter what type of opinion you might have about it. Just create that mob mentality surround it. Unfortunately, though, you'd expect, well, if you were naive, you'd expect better out of what's going on in legacy media. He went on CBS Morning to tout this, and I would like to play his response. There's a line at the end that I absolutely love and mirrors something that we talk about every show on this day, mainly being that they're called the 99% and the 1% for a reason, because there's a whole hell of a lot more of us than there are of them. Listen to what they talked about on CBS Morning the day of the announcement.
You know, what I find is that New Yorkers ask me less about how I describe my politics and more about whether my politics includes them. And I think what we can see is that a democratic socialist politics is one that should be judged on its delivery, like any ideology. And what we're showing in this city is we can pursue the big things like universal child care and do the pothole politics at the same time that we're showing, and not just filling in the potholes, changing the catch basins, but also repaving over 1,000 miles of roadway.
But Mr. Mayor, presidential and statewide elections are often decided in battleground regions that do not look like New York City.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. Before I was the mayor, I was an assembly member of Astoria and Long Island City. At that time, I was told that you could only be a Democratic Socialist in Northwest Queens. Then I became the mayor. Now the next question is the state. Then the next question will be the country. I think that this is a politics that can flourish anywhere because, frankly, there is only one majority in this country. That's the working class. And it's time we have a politics that puts them at the heart of what it is that we're pursuing and not as part of the appendix.
Trying to say that taxing millionaires in order to fund a universal child care program would only work in New York is some really backwards thinking, if you're asking for my opinion on the matter. When he first won his election, you may remember if you were listening to the show the day after, I asked the people of Northeast Wisconsin, would a freeze the rent politician earn your vote here in our neck of the woods? And I would argue Northeast Wisconsin is most certainly not a liberal or leftist bastion. It did go blue for the Supreme Court race, but realistically, find me a county that didn't a couple of weeks ago. But by and large, I'd argue it's a pretty moderate swath of the American public. We had that conversation for an hour. I had people in trailer parks reaching out to the program to say, my rent for where I keep my trailer in 3 years has gone from $450 a month to $1,050 a month. And while some people might call this communism, I'm looking for any solutions as to find a way to not be completely frozen out of living. $1,050 a month to live in a trailer. No disrespect to people living in trailers, but oftentimes the people who find themselves doing that are doing that because the idea of rent or owning a full-blown home is either A, not cost effective, or B, it could just possibly be too much space for the kind of life that you've decided to live at that point of your career, and maybe the mobility speaks to you. There's plenty of reasons why you end up there, but by and large, the bulk of the reason is absolutely a cost-effective issue. For an hour, we received calls from people in this neck of the woods saying this is actually a good idea. There's something that can come from this man, this democratic socialist, that makes sense in Northeast Wisconsin. Not all of it, but the fact of the matter is, as I oftentimes highlight, the status quo is not acceptable anymore. As Andrew out in Oshkosh highlights, tell me, the taxpayer, why the government is still spending billions on subsidies to the oil and gas industry. You're exactly right, because that's not welfare, Andrew. That's a subsidy. That's the difference. I'm joking, of course. We have a way of compartmentalizing government involvement in different parts of our lives as either welfare and handouts or subsidy for research and development without even thinking about the extenuating circumstances. And regardless of, and I'm not, obviously, you know this, Andrew, oftentimes when these people get these subsidies, when they get the tax cuts, they're still looking to replace workers with technology. They're still looking to not increase wages, and they're still looking to increase the prices that you pay at the pump or whatever the product is. We're using the oil and gas industry for a reason here, but realistically, we could take Elon Musk and SpaceX. We could take fill in the blank here. It doesn't matter. It's the same principles that we're talking about here. So you go on social media and you get astroturfed a bunch of wealthy people upset at the idea that wealthy people have to pay more. Then you turn on CBS News and he says, I just don't understand how this platform of taking the tiniest percentage possible from the wealthiest people on the planet and applying it to programs that will benefit tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. I just don't see how that's replicable in places outside of New York City. The idea that they are trying to funnel it that way, go watch someone on MSNBC try and talk about this policy. They'll tell you, I'll tell you what, this is good politics. It's hard to push back against it, but I'll tell you what, I don't like it. And that's because MSNBC is helmed by a bunch of former Republicans cosplaying as leftists. These are good ideas that are percolating through. And the only reason that they are portrayed as bad is because all of our media is bought and paid for. And unfortunately, social media, that at one point was the bastion of common sense, a place where you could go to actually get diverse opinions from real people, is now astroturfed by bots, AI, and paid shills, all pretending like objectively popular ideas are bad just to get the groupthink going. There's a set of statistics. I'm going to be putting a video together about it after the program ends today. Clearly, the talking points were passed down that despite the 1% owning only about 24% of the total wealth that's out there, they pay 40% of the income taxes. And what's interesting is, when you break it down, that actually is an accurate statement. What it doesn't take into account is all of the other taxes that exist in society. And when you look at all of the taxes that we pay, you begin to get a much more realistic picture of what that looks like. And I will have visual evidence of that on all of my social media feeds after the show wraps up today. So if you aren't already following along, make sure you follow and you'll have access to that video later on. But it shows that clearly talking points were handed down. Everybody's using the same talking points, and then the goal is to just convince enough people that are on the fence or are looking for a common sense solution that doesn't involve taxing billionaires, because for some people listening, I'm not coming down on you, that runs counter to your innate belief system. To be a pro-Reaganist for your entire life and then slowly come to grips with the fact that it never trickled down on you. And believe you me, I have grown in a number of ways as well. It's hard to undo that wiring sometimes. But no matter where you turn from a media perspective, they are there to convince you that this line of thinking is bad, that a 1% tax on $5 million homes is in excess and that we are a step away from becoming communist Russia is a laughable assertion, but it's the way that they are talking about it. I don't know what the simple folks of Wisconsin would want to do with taxing a handful of wealthy people in order to make sure they don't go broke when they get sick. How would you ever possibly sell that idea to them? Like, it's almost insulting. Like, and by almost insulting, I mean it is insulting, right? 920-281-1150. 920-281-1150. KG says, how can anyone take Mayor Mamdani critics seriously when they aren't even accurately describing his policies? Looking at you, Shapiro. Exactly. You have to straw man the arguments. That's the one thing that I think this show brings to the table more than anybody. I would argue I steel man people on the opposite side of my political beliefs. Who here was listening during the years of Joe Biden, where I oftentimes would state, I do not believe the entire MAGA movement is predicated on sexism, racism, and homophobia. Now, unfortunately, in the 16 months of the Trump presidency, the only things that have changed is that we are being meaner to Mexicans and trans people, and I'm going to need MAGA to kind of explain to me what good is happening otherwise. But I never leaned into that. I highlighted the shortcomings of the Biden administration and why Democrats would be mad about that. The fact that right-wingers have to straw man arguments, say, you know, a 1% tax on $5 million homes is a stone's throw away from an extra tax on your $4,000 a month rent apartment. No, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous way to talk about politics. Slippery slopes are not a good way to make conversations because I can slippery slope any policy that's been created ever. And I think that's an important thing to say. So I say all of this to say this is good policy that should be getting more attention, that we should be considering in the middle of a gubernatorial race. And by the way, we're going to have some fun next week. I am speaking to all of the Democratic, I'm at an event that will have all of the Democratic candidates for governor of Wisconsin. And I'm opening it up to you guys. Email me, text me, get the info any way you can. I'm not guaranteeing all of it's going to be put in, but what would you want me to say to them? I have 30 minutes. I'm interested what all of you would want to hear me say to these people, but I look around the nation for these kind of ideas and how they might be enacted in a positive way to make life easier for the working class. And I have to say, I'm pretty excited about having an opportunity to share some of these ideas with the people out there that might actually find themselves in the position to do something about it. I want to put a bow on this conversation, but we do have to squeeze one more break in here. We'll have about 8 or 9 minutes on the other side to end this conversation and also start what I want to get to in the 10 o'clock hour. The concept of the rotating villain and why it always seems like no matter what the breakdown of our Congress is, the popular stuff gets blocked and the unpopular stuff goes through, with a handful of exceptions here and there. And we're going to talk about that. All of it coming up on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. Outside the Box, WHBY. Jarmani in the YouTube chat's telling me that she can't catch the last 20 minutes of the show because she has to work, which I hate to inform you all is an unacceptable excuse for missing this program. The work can wait, you know, it can get done eventually. I'm joking, of course. It's available on the WHBY app, or of course, you could subscribe to my Ben Comino's YouTube page. That's always very helpful for anybody trying to help young upstart media person who's doing his damnedest to try and get the actual truth out there with so much noise and nonsense going on around the world. And shout out to the people locally who are super supportive of this whole speaking engagement I'm doing next Saturday. Val saying, what an opportunity for you. Can't wait for you to debrief your experience with the prospective candidates on a future show. Oh, I absolutely will. What's funny is I'm talking with the person who asked me to do it, and they were like, oh, we want you to give us hope for the future. And I was like, that is not my MO, but I can absolutely try. I can absolutely try to make that what it's about here. We'll see what happens. I'm already writing it in my head, so I think we'll have a good time and impress upon them what the people of Northeast Wisconsin want and like what the potential is out there. Tim, my good friend Tim, saying collect all the listeners' ideas and call it Project 2027. That would be let the candidates know that they can earn our vote by following what people want. That's a very good idea, Tim. I believe that's what people refer to as politics. I think that's what politics are, and it'd be nice to return to that. We've got another one here. I don't think there's a name on this, or at the very least, it was never saved. Says end corporate welfare, tax the rich their fair share, and eliminate taxes on over 65-year-old and anyone making under 60K or less. There's some validity to these kind of things that I think that we can get behind. I will say I struggle with like the elimination of property taxes for retired people. And I understand that there are people losing their homes because the property taxes are getting stupid. I think we have to have that kind of real conversation. But I'm just going to be honest with you. And I've been nice to boomers all week. And I don't want to come off as callous here. But like you guys started your life when the taxes were actually taxing billionaires. And then we cut all the taxes while the boomers were accumulating wealth. And now they're saying now that all the boomers no longer have child-age children, that they don't want to pay the taxes that contribute to schooling. Meanwhile, the older generations, when they had children in school, were paying for it. So, like, there's an element of what you're saying that I can get behind that I think is worth talking about here, but I think we have to have a real conversation about how we're going to keep a lot of this stuff funded if we cut everything. But I think it is getting out of hand for working class people while absolutely not reflecting favorably on the wealthiest individuals. Case in point, we had a conversation earlier in the year / end of last year when the SNAP benefits were cut. Why were they cut? The Mexicans are getting our SNAP benefits, or whatever the stupid rationale was. And also, poor people are eating cookies instead of fruit. That's not what I signed up for. If you're going to be on SNAP benefits, I want you to eat healthy. Okay, fine. Let's say I actually give that argument a little bit of credence here. That's a fine assertion of what you want to see happen. With the tax dollars going into SNAP benefits. Not saying I agree with it, but let's say I'm okay with that attitude coming from people. The Trump administration's 2027 budget is slashing fruit and vegetable portion of the nutrition program for women, infants, and children, otherwise known as the WIC program. They are looking to cut it by 75%. That would mean cutting $52 down to $13 for fully or mostly breastfeeding participants, and $26 down to $10 for young children. This is all going to be in the name of paying for a massive tax cut for billionaires and also funding the Defense Department to the tune of $1.5 trillion. So explain to me why CBS Mornings says it is almost impossible to replicate the idea of taxing some of the wealthiest people in a city an extra 1% on their second homes. That is not replicable. But the idea of cutting access to fruits and vegetables in the WIC program by 75% in the name of funding tax cuts for billionaires is universal politics that everybody should get behind. Somebody explain to me where that logic begins and ends, because I am struggling to determine how it works that way. It's egregious. It's obviously flagrant, and it goes to show you how much these two systems work against us, that being politics and the media. And we will be talking about the political side of things in the 10 o'clock hour. We're hammering the media side of things right now. We're going to talk about that from a political perspective as well. I'll explain how in one moment. We got two more text messages we'll try and squeeze in here. As Blue Canary says on the TikTok line, so weird. How did they manage to tax billionaires before? It's because it's just like anything else. When we fund schools, people say, oh, as soon as you increase the funding for schools, it's impossible to bring it back. It's the same idea with tax cuts. Once you cut billionaire taxes, they really put up a fuss about the idea of it going back. That's how it goes from between 70 and 91% down to 21%. And when a Democrat shows up and says, I think it should be 28%, Republicans go, that's socialism. And around we go. Jim says one tax that needs instituting is the large Social Security Medicare increase for all private equity income. I'm with you on that one. These people are leading to the underreported massive cliff coming soon in Social Security funding by cutting wages and jobs, thus lessening the funding coming in that they are weakening everyone's old age lives. Exactly. I'm right there with you on that one. KG says, I don't have children in school, but I benefited from a public education when I was a child, so I don't complain about paying taxes to support the public. What's funny is I think it's something like 12 of every $13 or something like that that goes into welfare programs goes to people over the age of 65, whereas previous generations, the older generations learned to live with less and live more traditional lives while allowing more money to go to the people trying to start a life. And this is one of the first times where we're inverting it. And when you highlight that or say that out loud, you get called names by the people that tend to find themselves in that demographic. But it's an interesting statistic, nevertheless. All right. A midnight hearing to try and pass the FISA bill, an opportunity to stop the War Powers Act, not just for Donald Trump, but for all presidents going forward, and the effort we talked about yesterday to stop $300 million worth of bulldozers. We're going to jump into the idea of rotating villains and why it feels like nothing ever gets done in politics. That's on the other side of the news. You're listening to Outside the Box here on WHBY. So the listeners on the TikTok chat can hear what you're saying, Landon, and I thought you'd appreciate. I have a comment here from Native Gamer that just says this man's voice sounds crisp. I don't know how to explain it other than that. That sounds like a nice way to sound, though. Yeah, have a feeling that you're going to be introduced as crisp Landon Moore on our on our chats going forward here. I have a strong feeling that's going to be the case. All right, here's Hooper. All right, we're back. Outside the Box, Ben Cominos, WHBY Political Voices Network. Outside the Box is brought to you by Roush Plumbing and Remodeling, the plumbing and remodeling company the Fox Valley depends on. If you're just joining us, we started off a little bit impromptu with the announcement of the reopening of the strait to all parties involved. Now, it is only a 10-day announcement while ceasefire negotiations are going on between both Israel and Lebanon, as well as the ongoing conversations that we've been dealing with between America and Iran, set to expire on Tuesday, although I have a feeling those will probably end up getting extended. I don't expect to see prices come down in any kind of meaningful way. I saw like a $4 reduction in the price of a barrel of oil, but as we were highlighting, $30 million an hour in extra profit for the largest 100 oil and gas companies around the planet. We'll see if those prices actually reflect the allowance of some of these boats to come through, and then we kind of tied that idea of corporate greed and excess profits into the new tax that's been proposed in New York, and kind of highlighting how both new media as well as legacy media have been talking about this situation. Now I want to get into how this show was supposed to start. We kind of inverted the hours here. Nothing wrong with that. But this is where I wanted to start, because I woke up at 4:30 in the morning, as I always do. And I'm a quick riser these days. I just get up and I'm like bang, and my mind's going a mile a minute here. Um, and my social media feeds were inundated with a conversation about FISA and surveillance. Now, FISA is one of those pieces of legislation, and I had a coworker who heard me commiserating outside with some of my coworkers because I oftentimes, as you know, the people who know this show well know I live and breathe this show. Like the stuff that I talk about, it's not like I pick stuff that I think is going to be the most interesting stuff for people to hear about. I pick up what I want to talk about. And then if you guys want to stick around, I'm glad you do. But I just pick the stuff that I want to talk about that I think sticks out and lends itself either to the issues that we are faced with or possible solutions to the issues that we are faced with. And let's just say I was on one this morning about FISA because I had a coworker walk past me and say, well, if you aren't doing anything illegal, then why does it matter if the government's spying on you? Which I know she was doing it just because she knows how to push my buttons, but at the same time, it was successful, and I was angry for like the next 20 minutes. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, it essentially allows for the government to be able to spy on you. Now, legally, the government cannot directly point cameras at you and spy on you that way. But what they can do is buy the data from your laptop company, the company that owns your phone, the social media companies where you are live streaming your TikTok Live, YouTube Live, and Facebook Live. They can buy all that data, use it to spy on you, and determine if you might be a threat later in life. Like if you have things to say like, oh, I don't know, the buffer zone between Israel and Lebanon feels like an effort by Israel to take some of the land of Lebanon in a shady but technically legal way. That might end up getting you on a list. Obviously, I have issues with it, and as I oftentimes joke, but also a lot of truth is said in jest, as a progressive, as a leftist, we have the unholy burden of being right about stuff about 10 years too early. And when we were saying this kind of stuff in the 2007, 8, 9 era, after the passage of the Patriot Act, the NSA, it was the MAGA movement, the conservative movement that would eventually evolve into the MAGA movement, saying the exact same thing my coworker said to jerk me around. If you're not worried about crimes, don't worry about it. Then it turns out that FISA was used to spy on your orange dad president, Donald Trump. All of a sudden now you recognize the shortcomings because technically we can identify a criminal however we see fit to do it. It's a shame it took that moment to get you guys on board with team, hey, maybe you shouldn't be spying on me, but whatever. I'm glad you guys are here, so let's jump into it. The reason why I was inundated with information about this at 4:30 in the morning is because Speaker Mike Johnson decided to call a special session of Congress at midnight in order to try and pass this. Why at midnight? Because it is absolutely an unpopular piece of legislation that nobody who votes for Republicans wants to see pushed across the finish line, because as of 2026, I would argue that Republicans are more aware of surveillance and spying than liberals are today. Still not more so than leftists, but definitely more aware of it than liberals. And how do I know this? Is because the whole FISA Act is being positioned surrounding the idea of, do you want Donald Trump to spy on you? Here's the thing. I don't. For the record, I don't. Disclaimer, I don't. But also, I don't want Kamala Harris spying on me. Also, I don't want Gavin Newsom spying on me. This bill, and we're going to get to the bad parts later, but let's start with some happy news because I never get to do that, and it's Friday, right? This bill ended up not passing by one vote, which it's normally the way it works, but in the other direction. And that actually happened 2 other times in the last 24 hours that we're about to jump into. But every single Democrat, plus Thomas Massey, Tim Burchett, and Beetlejuice all voted to block this. Every single Republican otherwise voted to push this through. Now, it is not done for good. It is only because a second proposition was brought up right after that to extend FISA for 13 more days. So it will now expire. It was set to expire on Monday. There's not going to be enough time to get it across the finish line. So now they are set. They have pushed it to April 30th. It is set to expire in 13 days, where negotiations are going to be happening with the 3 Republicans, along with any Democrats that were maybe on the fence. They just got to pick a couple of them off, and something tells me we're probably going to find a way to do that over the course of the next 2 weeks. Hopefully I'm wrong, but, we'll see what ends up happening the end of the day. Beetlejuice is Lauren Boebert, for the people that are confused in the text line there. Look up, just type into Google Lauren Boebert Beetlejuice, and the rest of it will all make sense to you. So you have this piece of legislation, obviously unpopular. Mike Johnson calling a midnight session in the middle of a time period where the Republican Party is already just getting absolutely obliterated in every special session that you see take place. They are now trying to force this through in a way that a lot of people that voted for Donald Trump are upset. Here's the thing, though. I'm a firm believer that had Kamala Harris won, or if this effort were made in 2023 or in 2029, when inevitably there is a Democratic president again, because that's what's going to happen, because this administration is bad and it's only going to get worse. I think it would be inverted. I think every Democrat would be voting to make FISA legal, or to extend FISA. Every Republican would be voting to block it, and maybe 3 or 4 Democrats would be siding with Republicans in order to make it look like it's not a straight party line vote. Democrats would be telling you this is in the name of finding Proud Boys and white nationalists. Conservatives would tell you they're going to use it to put you in jail for being a straight white cis male in America. And you'd hear the same talking points, but it would be a game. For the record, I am not implying that you would be put in jail just for identity politics, but I do think that they would begin spying on you for being vocal, whether it be on your social media platforms, your professional platforms, or whatever the case may be, once you began to be viewed as a threat to the systems that be. As we highlighted yesterday, close to 80% of states have rules about being critical of Israel at this point, and that's only going to get worse as time goes on. So I say all that to say, this midnight effort happened in the same 24-hour period that, as we highlighted yesterday, there was also a piece of legislation to vote against, or to vote in favor or against, sending bulldozers to Israel in the name of using it against Palestine and Lebanon to knock over homes. It's no coincidence that this ceasefire has been signed at the same time that we passed legislation to give Israel $300 million worth of bulldozers. Definitely can't use that for healthcare or anything. We're using it to send bulldozers to Israel, and they're going to use that to knock over homes in Lebanon and create the buffer zone that I referenced about 10 minutes ago. It's very obviously the way that is going to trend. That was able to pass by one vote. Then there was a conversation about the Iran War Powers Act. This was a piece of legislation to make sure that Donald Trump and any president in perpetuity would not be able to unilaterally launch a war against any country because they got talked into it by another country's leader. Donald Trump is not the first president to move unilaterally in wartime action. In fact, pretty much every single one of them in my entire life has done it, and even beyond then. The reason, again, by one vote, 214 to 213, this vote did not pass. So Donald Trump will be able to continue operating unilaterally. And what's interesting about that one, and what it's going to lend itself to, is the overarching point of this hour of content. I posted a video about this shortly after the bill failed because I was very upset with what ultimately ended up happening. When I did, I was inundated with comments, most of which talking about the concept of a rotating villain, which is what we're going to get into in the next segment. But then there were a couple of MAGAs and blue MAGAs that got into my comments and had some pretty interesting conversations. One of them specifically grinded my gears a bit. What they said was, it's a shame, if Eric Swalwell would have been in, he probably would have voted no, and then we'd be tied. To which I was like, I really don't think you're understanding why I am posting this video in conjunction with a conversation about the $300 million for bulldozers. I don't think you're realizing that no matter what we are talking about, there is always one more legislator than is necessary to push through the objectively unpopular legislation that is in Congress. And there will always be one more legislator than is necessary to block it. Believe you me, I am thrilled that the FISA extension was blocked. I am not optimistic that it will happen again April 30th. They will find a way to coalesce and vote to spy on American citizens for no reason. That is going to happen. We're going to put a pin in this conversation so I can throw to a quick break, and this one's going to be pretty short. And when we come back, regular listeners of the show have listened to me list a handful of examples over my lifetime of a rotating villain. Joe Lieberman blocking the public option after Obamacare was passed. Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema blocking price negotiations for drugs so that we could only do it for 10 drugs for people over the age of 65, the same population looking to avoid paying their property taxes. There comes a time when it's not a coincidence anymore. And yes, I don't want to sound like an idiot. This is also in conjunction with every single Republican in the House and Senate voting against the objectively popular thing. And that's going to be for people that vote Republican to reconcile with. I cannot tell people how to vote. I can just keep highlighting that the cost of living, the cost of your medicine, the cost of homes, the military industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industrial complex, the agriculture industrial complex, and so many other factors that weigh on you every single day. Republicans seem to be able to vote for this stuff with impunity without worrying about backlash from their voters because Congress hung up a rainbow flag. But it does not give carte blanche for the Democratic Party to all of a sudden turn around and a handful of them find their bipartisan streak every time something like that happens. And the crazy part is, I thought I was being thorough with the examples that I was providing. It turns out that I was barely scratching the surface. For those of you that don't know who Glenn Greenwald is, he is a journalist who takes a lot of heat because he has the audacity to wait for it, talk about both sides as if they're two sides of the same coin. He wrote an article for Salon back in 2010 that he reposted after we saw the Iran War Powers Act fail, and I took the time to read it, and I highlighted a specific passage that I would like to read to all of you guys that highlights just over a short couple year period while the Democrats had close to a supermajority, exactly how the system works. And it's really going to drive home some of the points that I like to make on this show. Before I go, Joe says, couldn't there be a law that bills can only be voted on between 8 and 5? That definitely makes sense, and I feel like that would be a good move. I'm going to throw the break here. We're going to come back. We're going to dive into this excerpt from the article and kind of highlight the shortcomings again, that while every Republican is voting for the objectively bad thing, barring a few holdouts, that does not excuse what we're watching happen. And it says to me that you could give the Democrats 80 seats in the Senate and 21 of them would find a way to join their Republican cohorts. Wait until you hear some of these examples if you don't know what I'm talking about. It actually is going to blow your mind. Stay right where you are. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY. All right, we're back outside the box. Ben Cominos, WHBY. Half hour away to calling it a weekend before it's a hockey night in Pittsburgh. NHL playoffs starting this weekend here. I don't have time to talk about it because there's never time to do anything fun on this show, except for talk about movies, which my movies podcast is live as well. We actually watched the streaming movie on Hulu, Pizza Movie. Balky and I reviewed it. Balky did not like it. It made me laugh at times. I'll tell you what, right now, if I were 19 years old, I would have loved that movie. I think I was a little aged out of the demographic, but there were definitely moments that still got me for sure. If you guys enjoy this show and would like to see a more human element of me on the WHBY app, the show's called Off Topic with Ben and Balky. We break down one of the newer releases every week. We're going to see the new Bob Odenkirk movie, Normal, next week, which, I mean, I'd watch that guy read the newspaper. I find him to be a very entertaining individual. He played Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad, but I have high hopes for that one there. But I think I gave Pizza Movie like a 5.5 or a 6. We talk about every movie for about an hour, though. So if you're a movie person and you like listening to me talk, maybe check out Off Topic. Andrew out in Oshkosh said, were you able to listen to Hakeem Jeffries' response to the war update after Hedgeseth's morning brief? I didn't, actually. He goes on to say, I felt Jeffries brought up some good points that the Democrats need to sharpen their concentrations on during the next 6 months prior to this fall's election, such as Trump's mafia's pay-to-play policies, for one example. Absolutely, but again, all of that sucks, and I think it's worth highlighting, but again, I need to be shown why Democrats are different. My main sticking point, what sticks in my craw, is I still cling to being called a conspiracy theorist when Democrats had the trifecta when talking about corporate greed and wealth inequality. Yes, it has only grown exponentially worse since January of 25. But as I often state on this show, Democrats are the party of the status quo. Republicans pull us further away from the status quo, and then Democrats maintain the new, even crappier status quo until you get frustrated again and Republicans win. That's the cycle of things here. So yes, Donald Trump's pay-to-play policies are absolute garbage and need to be highlighted for what they are. And it's kind of nice because anytime a Republican tries to talk about corruption or fraud within a Democratic establishment, as long as the Democrats are doing good things, I can just openly ignore it because we know they have completely turned a blind eye to everything, every single day that's taking place all the time. But while Jeffries has a good point there, the fact remains there was an autopsy on why the Democrats ended up losing in 2026 and the reason that, or in 2024. And I'm a firm believer that a lot of that reason had to do with Middle Eastern policy, foreign policy, as well as the cost of living. And they buried that autopsy because they don't want us to know where they need to change. So what you're hearing Jeffries do is trying to float anything out there, in my opinion, other than the reasons they need to change. Because I'm here to tell you right now, if the autopsy said, you know what, you guys don't complain enough about Trump, I promise you that autopsy would have been made public. So the fact that that wasn't made public says to me that there is probably something that their donors do not want them to budge on, and they are trying to find ways to circumvent that. I am not confused on the concept of harm reduction or what it is that the Republican Party represents in America these days. But if they want to win elections, I am never telling you guys what I want to see happen. I'm telling you guys based on my interactions with people on social media, people in the real world, things that I see in the legacy media, plus my own interpretation of events, what's ultimately going to end up happening. I predicted that Joe Biden would lose the election in January 23 based on the idea that they were trying to convince you that Bidenomics was working and inflation was transitory. I said in January of 23, if this is your campaign message, you are going to get obliterated. And here we are in 2026, and Donald Trump is trying to convince you that Trumponomics is working. We're watching the same 4-year cycle play out over and over again, and we're just changing between the red and the blue team. Phil says, I believe I heard yesterday on HBY right after the Pope's most recent contents about Trump canceled funding for a Catholic charity that existed for 60 years and helped unaccompanied children coming to the United States. Is that true? I came across the same conversation as well. And then he said, go Penguins, right on. I came across that topic as well, and I believe there is some validity to it. I'm sure they're giving a separate reason for why it happened, but I don't think it's a coincidence. You have also noticed in the last 12 hours or so a definite softening of the rhetoric concerning the Pope, which I feel like we're running out of unique sentences to say in America, but that's definitely one of the ones that that I didn't think I'd be saying when I took this career. And Jim says, I doubt the National Dem Party could actually figure out the correct lessons from their autopsy. Too scattered. I think it's actually pretty straightforward, Jim. Tax billionaires stop sending Israel unwarranted. 85% of the Democratic Party wants to see the arms and funding stop going to Israel. And anybody under the age of 50 really doesn't see a firm, not anyone. Most people under the age of 50 are struggling to get by on a month-to-month basis, despite doing things that 15 years ago would have absolutely guaranteed you at least the basics of an American life. Now, all of a sudden, not finding the same pathway to that eventuality. So with that, and Jim, you may want to put the earmuffs on for this conversation because you're going to have to brace for impact here. As I was teasing during the last segment, the concept of the rotating villain. Glenn Greenwald, after the Iran Powers Act failed by one vote, with every single Republican in the House plus a handful of Democrats voting to make, or excuse me, not even a handful, just one, Jared Golden, who, what a coinky-dink, announced his retirement from politics before voting this way, decided to make sure that the president could unilaterally engage in wartime activities and enrich the military-industrial complex. Failed, just like the vote failed to stop sending bulldozers off to Israel. I'm going to now read a Salon article, an excerpt from a Salon article that Glenn Greenwald wrote in 2010 about the Obama administration. It will highlight one thing that I talk about with you guys regularly. But when I read this, and it's a bit, not a super long read, but it's two very long paragraphs that I'm going to read to you, it really extends what I highlight with Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema and drug prices, and Joe Lieberman and Medicare Advantage prices, and public option. Listen to this. This is what the Democratic Party does. It's who they are. They're willing to feign support for anything their voters want, just as long as there's no chance they can pass it. They won control of Congress in the 2006 midterm election by pretending they wanted to compel an end to the Iraq War and Bush surveillance and interrogation abuses because they knew they would not actually do so. They indeed, once they were given the majority, once they were given the majority, the Democratic-controlled Congress continued to fund the war without conditions, to legalize Bush's eavesdropping program, and to do nothing to stop Bush's habeas and interrogation abuses. Parentheses, gosh, what can we do? We just don't have 60 votes. The primary tactic in this game is villain rotation. They always have a handful of Democratic senators announce that they will be the ones who deviate this time from the ostensible party position and impede success. But the designed villain constantly shifts, so the party itself can claim it supports these measures while an always changing handful of their members invariably prevent it. Ready for this? 1 minute, it's Jay Rockefeller as the prime villain leading the way in protecting Bush surveillance programs and demanding telecom immunity. The next minute, it's Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Schumer joining hands and breaking with their party to ensure Michael McCaskey's confirmation as Attorney General. Then it's Big Bad Joe Lieberman single-handedly blocking Medicare expansion. Then it's Blanche Lincoln and Jim Webb joining Lindsey Graham to support the defunding of civilian trials for terrorists. And now they can't blame Lieberman or Ben Nelson any longer on health care since they don't need 60 votes. Jay Rockefeller voluntarily returns to the villain role, stepping up to put an end to the pretend movement among Senate Democrats to enact a public action via reconciliation. Including the examples that I give you, that's a half a dozen plus. different examples of Democrats voting with every single Republican in the House and Senate against objectively popular policies. And while it is not lost on me that as long as the Republican Party can keep getting votes based on how many rainbow flags are on Lego sets, it's going to be very difficult to hold Democratic politicians to account, because every time between 1 and 4 Democrats join their Republican cohorts, it's very easy for centrist Democrats and blue MAGAs to point to the fact that 95% of Democrats vote for the popular thing. But as somebody who sees this play out over and over again, it says to me that if we all picked ourselves up by our bootstraps and voted blue no matter who for every single candidate and gave Democrats an 80-seat majority in the Senate, well, I can't get past the idea that they would find a way to find 21 Democrats that all of a sudden are moderates and are not in favor of whatever the objectively popular thing to do is again. I hope that I am wrong when I highlight this about them. But reading through this Salon article, which I do have reshared on my Twitter page, I'll get it up on other socials later. I only have it up on Twitter right now. But in reading the entirety of the article, it really highlights that this is not an accident. This is not a one-off. This is a very obvious trend. Upon losing that majority, which they obviously did because they refused to do anything popular with it, thus disenfranchising a lot of their voters, very comparably to what Republican voters are dealing with right now. 10 Republicans joined the rest of the Democratic Party to not ship all the Haitians back over the border because, wait for it, the Haitians do work that a lot of Americans don't want to do for major corporations. But they're going to look at it the same way, and now it is the Republican Party voters who are going to be disenfranchised. And Democrats are very obviously going to take the House back. There is a more than 50% chance they're going to take the Senate back. And then Donald Trump and the Republican Party can throw their hands up and say, we want to do all of this Haitian and rainbow flag stuff that you guys always complain about, but we can't because Democrats won't let us do it anymore. They want to talk about taxing the rich people, these commies, and around we go. That's why you got to show up and vote for us in 2028. That's why I had to laugh at J.D. Vance saying at Trash Party USA a couple days ago, oh, yeah, that's why you got up and vote. You got to get up and vote and change the system. I'm like, I'm sorry, change the system from Republicans dominating every element of it and not delivering what the Republican voters vote. What the hell are you talking about here? This is why I get so frustrated when an 18-year-old kid in Marionette runs for city council and he wins. And I guarantee you there's going to be people out there saying, oh, what's this guy going to know? He doesn't know the ins and outs of it. It's like, okay, excuse me. So you're upset with the regular people that are there that'll allow for the status quo to happen. But the second somebody comes up and shakes up the status quo, the second Imam Dani shows up and says, hey, we're going to tax wealthy people 1% more. And everybody loses their minds. And the entire Republican right demonizes him as a communist and says we have to stop any of this from happening. Meanwhile, out of the other side of their mouth, telling you that they know that government doesn't work for them and that there are a ton of failed systems out there. But let's keep voting for the same people to do the same things, because then otherwise, what would I have to complain about? This is the reality. As Susie sends me a bunch of clapping emojis. Thank you very much. She's clapping along with every single Republican. This is the game that is played. It's the kabuki theater. It's the two sides of the same coin. It's the MAGA versus blue MAGA. It's the crux of outside the box that we talk about on a regular basis on this show, being highlighted time and time again. And we saw it happen 2 out of 3 times in the last 24 hours. Jared Golden stepping up and saying, you know what? I think Donald Trump should be allowed to unilaterally do whatever he wants in wartime, as should every single Democratic president that will follow him. It's every single time. And mark my words, it's going to happen again before April 30th surrounding FISA. Mark my words now. I realize it's good news, and I realize it's Friday. And I realize that I should be happier about an objectively positive thing happening. I am not optimistic. and I do not trust these people as far as I can throw them. And this is just example 247 of something that we talk about every single day, but laid out in such a coherent and concise way. We're going to squeeze one final break in here. I might read the back half of the excerpt one more time of all the examples and drive it home. I can see a couple of the chats here definitely blowing up with some thoughts about what's going on. We'll get all this information in before we call it a show here, start prepping for the NHL playoffs and Haley's show, all right? So everyone stay tuned. We got one more segment here. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY. Oh, hey, I'm back. Ben Cominos, Outside the Box, WHBY. Larry's telling me I don't know what old is yet. I'm 38, man. That's basically 40, which, may as well just hang it up now. Like, when's Social Security? 41, 42? When's retirement? I feel like I'm getting there. Larry actually brought up an interesting question. Oh, Ernie's asking me when Tom Tiffany's going to be on. I'll tell you what, I've been putting off asking. Like, I might bring the Dem candidates on because there's a primary, and I don't know what the purpose of bringing like the final gubernatorial candidate on. It's not like Tom Tiffany's running against anybody. If he's willing to come on the show, I would absolutely love that. But don't tell him I told you guys this. But if he comes on the show, he's going to try and come here and talk about fraud programs and how he wants to audit all these different programs in Wisconsin. And then I'm going to ask him how his Republican cohorts reacted when he voted against increasing military funding after they failed their 8th audit in a row, knowing damn well that he voted to increase their funding, and he's not going to know how to react to it. And it's going to be a very funny moment. I can tell you guys now, I can call the shot now. I'm already going to bring that up. And when I do it, you're going to be like, oh my God, he was talking about that back in April, that he was going to say that. And we'll all have a good laugh about it. But Larry brought up an interesting conversation. We're talking about the concept of a rotating villain, specifically within the Democratic Party, because the Republican Party has a knack of getting away with playing the villain in most votes, because as long as rainbow flags exist, they have an out to not have to worry about never improving the living standard for any of their constituents materially. And you guys are going to have to reconcile with that. I can't do anything. All I can say is the party that pretends to be the good guys needs to act like the good guys then. And I said, if Democrats win the House and Senate back, I am expecting the rotating villain to turn its ugly head yet again, unless, of course, they are actually smart about it and propose legislation, to which Larry asked me, are they smart? And I don't think they are. I think if we give the Democrats nationally the House and Senate, I think they will take those 2 years to try and prosecute members of ICE, which will be objectively popular with a lot of people. I'm not saying I hate that idea, but I'm saying if I can only choose one, a bill about affordable health care or a bill about ICE agents going to jail, I would take the health care and let the ICE agents get away with all the bull crap that they've been doing for the last year and a half. Just fire them and move on, because they don't collect the $50,000 bonus if they don't work for 5 full years. So just fire a bunch of them. And then they'll handle the rest of that there. Just give me the healthcare program at that point. Increasing taxes on wealthy people or impeaching Trump. Give me the increased taxes on wealthy people. Leave the Trump impeachment conversations wherever the hell you want to. It's not going to happen. The Democrats, were they to regain power, were they not the rotating villain, they should every half an hour be proposing different pieces of legislation that are objectively popular surrounding the cost of living, and make the Republican Party vote against it every single time. Say, here's 3 bills that we proposed in the last 24 hours that will address your bottom line, that is a kitchen dinner table conversation that you care about, that we want to get done, and do that every single day. Do it every single day for 2 years. Make them vote it down every single time. Show that you mean business economically. Show that you want to improve our lives, make things better. I think the example that I gave, and I will just read the back half of the excerpt again in case you are just joining the conversation. It's a Salon article from 2010 written from Glenn Greenwald talking about the concept of the rotating villain, how there is one person, but that person changes, or a handful of people, so that the Democratic Party can claim wanting to be the good guy while objectively voting against popular things every single time. He says 1 minute it's Jay Rockefeller is the prime villain leading the way in protecting Bush surveillance programs and demanding telecom immunity. The next minute it's Feinstein and Schumer joining hands to break with the party and ensure Mike McCaskey's confirmation as Attorney General. Then it's Joe Lieberman single-handedly blocking Medicare expansion. Then it's Blanche Lincoln and Jim Webb joining Lindsey Graham in defunding civilian trials for terrorists. And then it's Jay Rockefeller again stopping reconciliation so that we couldn't have a vote on whether or not a public option would be included in Obamacare. They always had a reason. But I will say, in 2009 and in 2010 and even in 2006 and 7, when all this stuff was happening in the article, social media was just taking off. Facebook was still just for college kids. Twitter barely even existed yet at that point. People were not as vocal politically in the quote-unquote town square that is social media. They might talk about it with their friends. They might blog about it to the 4 people that read their blog. But the fact that somebody could post a video, I have 300 people almost that follow me on TikTok, and there's political videos that I put up that over 35,000 people have seen. Like, it's a very different environment today compared to what it was in 2007 and 2008. And I don't know that a party, especially the party trying to pretend to be the good guys in a lot of these conversations, will be able to get away with the same kind of nefarious actions that they were able to get away with in that era, to have an almost supermajority and not pass any kind of actual leftist policy. They pass essentially a watered down version of Romney Care as health care and call it a liberal achievement. They say, except Romney Care at least had a public freaking option on the statewide level. Like, you wouldn't be able to get away with this. And even though I'm sure most people that listen to this show look at the idea of a mass expulsion of the Haitian population as just some kind of more MAGA identity politics BS, and it is, don't think it's any coincidence that 10 Republicans joined Democrats to not do the thing that Republicans wanted to see. Because, again, it's not a matter of caring about Haitians. If this were just an act of cruelty to the Haitian population, I don't think there would have been very many Republicans joining their Democratic cohorts. But the fact is, a lot of these people were hired by business owners that pay them less, or at the very least couldn't find qualified workers in America, white workers, to do this in this country. And so a handful of Republicans joined all of the Democrats to make sure the thing that MAGA voters wanted to see happen didn't happen. It's no coincidence. I can play this game in both directions. It's more obvious to me coming from the left because, again, I think there is empirical as well as historical evidence that backs up that leftist policies lead to a burgeoning middle class and lead to the kind of middle class lifestyle that I think a lot of Americans have grown accustomed to using, exhibiting outside of the last 15 years as Reaganomics has really taken effect, and the lack of competition has allowed for companies to absolutely gouge us out of being able to afford most basic necessities anymore. I say all of that to say I don't know how much longer they can get away with it, but it's going to be incumbent on us to pay attention and hold firm on the stuff that we believe. Do you know how many liberals attack me for highlighting this rotating villain thing? And then meanwhile, if you guys saw how my TikTok chat started, it was a guy calling me a Democrat, say that I was carrying water for the Democratic Party. That all happened over the course of an hour and 50 minutes. That both of those things happened. And I don't know. I don't know what you want me to say. It's a strange time to be alive, but we can't hope for something better. Phil out in Oshkosh says, wish that they could have anyone elected to office sign a document stating that if they do not vote for what is popular with the people, can thrown immediately out of office and not receive the pension that they received. Have a great hockey night. Well, dude, that's what a recall is. They actually tried to recall Scott Walker after Act 10 was enacted here in Wisconsin, and there were actually 2 efforts to recall Speaker Voss because he did not go along with the dumbass belief that Donald Trump had the election stolen from him in 2020 long enough. I'm not saying that he didn't go along with it. I'm saying he almost got recalled twice because he didn't go along with it long enough. And they tried to recall him twice, but there weren't enough votes. But those measures do exist. It's just a matter of enacting them. And then again, there are people in my text line. There's people stewing in their car right now. How is this guy so angry at Democrats when it's only 2 people and it's 57 different Republicans doing it? If these people were to vote against them, they would not show up to the recall effort. That's where the cultist behavior of politics really shows its ugly side. That's when you begin to notice the MAGA versus blue MAGA comparison, because looking inward is so much harder. How many people, the Democratic Party, and this is a strange conversation to bring up with 2 minutes left, but when the DNC was happening in 24, Democratic electeds would walk past Palestine protesters and plug their ears as they were walking to go and listen to the speakers. And now 85% of people are against what is happening. Why? Because in 2024, to be against what was happening would be to be against a Democratic president. And now that it is a Republican president, 17 out of 20 people all of a sudden realize the obviously bad thing happening is an obviously bad thing happening. It is so much more difficult to be critical of your party when your party has power, because in your eyes, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, what the other party represents is so much scarier to you in your mind. And it is so much more difficult. That's why I state, when I did this show in an election year, critical of Biden and critical of Harris, not to toot my own horn, but I'm gonna toot. It takes guts to do that kind of stuff because most people will carry water until the election's over and then start complaining about the stuff that they want to see again. And I refuse to be that kind of host on this show, and it's not easy. So that exists. It's called a recall. And if anybody out there, after listening to this hour-long diatribe about rotating villains and why it holds us behind, feel that your elected representatives reflect on you in that way, start trying to community organize and put together recall efforts, and you can actually do something about this. Unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to put a pin in it there. But I appreciate the question or statement nevertheless. Guys, this was a really solid week of engagement with all of you. This has been a really fun job this week, despite the fact that the actual news is pretty downer every single day. If you haven't already, download the WHBY app. It's free and easy to use, and you can support a local radio station there, which is awesome. And if you want to support the host, Outside the Box with Ben Cominos, I have a YouTube page at Ben Cominos, and you can also follow me on TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook. We're live every day from 9 to 11. We'll be back on Monday, guys. Go Penguins. Haley's up next.